markets. We still do not have access to real growth opportunities. And yet we've registered on thousands and thousands of databases. And yet even today, you hear people saying we're looking for Black female-owned companies, but we still do not have those opportunities. Is it because as women, we're not better organized? Or is it because they don't know where to find us or how to find us? And that is why Saibpp Women's Forum will exist. We need to create an environment where if anyone anywhere is looking for a Black executive, they know where to knock. They're looking for opportunities, they want to spend money on women, they know where to find us. We need to be found. We can no longer sit back and hope that they are gonna find us. We also need to go knocking at their doors, but we can't do that if we're not better organized ourselves. Going back in history, you will know that it was uncommon for women to own properties. You had to be married to someone, or you had to have your father register your property in their name. That also made sure that women cannot be empowered. Women stayed in toxic relationships as we see it today. Gender-based violence is evident to the fact that when women do not have money in their pockets, do not have access to funding and to property, they stay in toxic relationships and they have to end up in caskets. We are here to say that needs to come to an end. If we work together as women and we hold hands, we will change history. Property ownership is still one of the key fundamentals underpinning economic empowerment in this country, and yet Black females continue to be underrepresented. Where are these Black women? Why are they not organized? Well, we are here, let's organize ourselves. I recently read a clip or listened to a clip where Oprah was speaking. And Oprah was excited. She had just built a school in South Africa, and she was speaking to the late Miss Maya Angelou and telling her that I am so excited, I've finally built a legacy. And the intelligent, ever intelligent Miss Maya Angelou looked at her and said, Oprah, you do not know what your legacy is. Your legacy is every life that you have touched. Your legacy is every person who gains their voice because of you. And that hit home for me and for my fellow board members. We aspire to be the reason Black women find their voices. We aspire to be the voice for the voiceless. Our industry has not done enough to change, to transform. And therefore we are here to say, let's hold hands, let's move forward, and let's make history together. We will not do this sitting on the side as women and poking fun at the challenges that the industry has. We need to gather around and find solutions. And that is a call to action to all of you right now. Sign up, look forward. We look forward to working with you and building this organization. Thank you. Enjoy your afternoon with us. Thank you once again.
Thank you so very much, Fundi. We really look forward to really just engaging with you further on in this day. I did a terrible mistake by not actually introducing who you are, and I'd like to just explain to people who you are by reading out your bio quite quickly. So Fundi Mazibuko is co-founder of Full Serve Holdings Pty Limited, a facilities maintenance company providing maintenance services to the property industry. In this company, she is the head of business development and marketing. Full Serve is a medium-sized family-owned business which was started by Fundi and Saibpp Mazibuko 12 years ago. She has served as Gauteng chairperson for the Women's Property Network, SAPOA Conference Committee, and she's a board member of the Property Charter. She's also an alumni of Cherry Blair Foundation for Women and a member of the Dal Women Entrepreneurs, as well as the current board member at the South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners. So we are indeed in the presence of leadership and in the presence of greatness. And we look forward to having you as our chairperson, Fundi. So thank you very much for this opportunity. It would not be right for us to launch a forum without actually observing protocol and introducing Tolo Makaula, our president. Tolo is a professionally registered architect with 15 years of experience and a master's degree in architecture. from the University of the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University, Tolo served as senior management in a number of leading commercial architectural companies before becoming a partner at 472 Studio Architects. Tolo's focus since becoming a director of Saibpp 5 years ago was chairing the Learning and Development Committee, whose initiatives were responsible for the design and implementation of appropriate skills development initiatives, as well as the formation of various student chapters in Saibpp. Tolo also currently sits on the board of the PSCC, which is the Property Sector Charter Council, and serves at the Black Business Council in the Infrastructure Development Portfolio Committee. Tolo has also served on the Real Estate Charter and Services SETA. Tolo, thank you so much for having us.
Tabitha, thank you very much. I think mine really is just to offer words of support and of welcome to the launch of a very historic event, being the launch of the Saibpp Women's Forum. For starters, I'd like to thank all of you as members, and I'm talking to our participants, supporters, and friends of Saibpp, for the support that you've continuously showed to the organization, specifically through this time of pandemic, which has definitely affected our value proposition to yourselves. But it has also given us the opportunity to step back and to personally think and carefully realign business objectives in our various businesses, as well as in this organization. I'd like to welcome the panelists and obviously look forward to their valuable inputs, with the topic being equity and access and assets, which is increasing the participation of Black women in finance, property, and the built environment sector, which is a topic that I personally am very passionate about. My proudest realization at this event that I can share with all of you is that it has been blatantly clear that Saibpp has a culture of advancing women. For those of you who have been part of the organization for a while will know that my presidency is taking over from past president Ms. Nkulibo Khopa. And at my inauguration last year in Durban in August 2019, I mentioned that mine was to build on the initiatives that had already been put into place by Saibpp. That is obviously evident by the appointment of our CEO, Ms. Vuyisa Muchekwane. We have Ms. Tabise Mahabo, who was our first Saibpp bursar and is now heads Saibpp Youth. And we have our Western Cape chapter, which is led by a lady by the name of Mkita Nchanga, just as examples to show that Saibpp takes women's leadership quite seriously. I've always personally held the view that Saibb's strength as an organization revolves around a concept that we've always called servant leadership. And those that currently occupy leadership positions in Saibpp are ladies that have put their hands up. So once again, I'd like to thank you ladies for constantly showing leadership in all spheres of life and in Saibpp. Coincidentally, for the launch of today's forum, in his weekly newsletter, which is from the desk of the presidency, President Cyril Ramaphosa reminded us that this year marks the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Conference on Women, which placed the emancipation of women firmly on the global agenda. In line again with the topic being discussed today, our president made a clarion call for us to intensify measures to empower women economically, which he notes is also in line with the African Union decision to dedicate this decade to the financial inclusion of women. I therefore wish to repeat and to re-emphasize the president's message that unless women are brought into the mainstream of the economy, they will continue to bear the brunt of exclusion and be vulnerable to abuse and to exploitation. We're currently caught in this grasp of a terrible scourge of GBV, which as Saibpp, and I think I speak for all directors, we frown upon. However, we do believe that there's a direct correlation that can be drawn between financial empowerment and emancipation of women and the prevalence of this phenomenon. And as Saibpp, we will endeavor to take visible action to constantly create various platforms and to bring together various role players that will highlight this scourge and to ensure that justice, insofar as it can be realized through empowerment in our sector, specifically of women, is achieved. I'd just like to end off with a quote from the lady who just passed away, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the USA, who said, "Women belong in places where decisions are being made. And I'd like to see this, in the launch of this forum, as the beginning of just that, where Saibpp is going to place women firmly in places where decisions are being made. I'd like to thank you once again for your attendance and your unwavering support, and we look forward to a stimulating and inspired panel discussion. Ke a leboha.
Thank you so very much, Mr. President. We really look forward to hearing more from you at a later stage. First up, we're going to have our first speaker. I'm going to introduce you to who she is, and she will then give a presentation and then answer a few questions thereafter. Please do interact with us on the question section on your right. There are very many questions that you can ask us, so participate as much as you possibly can so that we know what it is that you require from us and so that we can then provide it to you. So our first speaker is Anne Kithuku Shongwe. Anne Kithuku Shongwe is the representative for the UN Women's South Africa Multi-Country Office, SAMCO, which is responsible for the women's empowerment and gender equality in Botswana, Lesotho, Swaziland, and Namibia, as well as South Africa, where the office is based. A key responsibility of her work is to develop women-owned businesses and the leadership capacity of women, both in the public and the private sector. During her years as a social entrepreneur, Anne has also been a public speaker on women empowerment, innovation, mobile learning, and social entrepreneurship. Anne has spoken on many platforms, including the World Economic Forum and TEDx Soweto, just to name a few. Anne, we're really looking forward to speaking to you today, and we really look forward to hearing what it is that you have to share. Please, take it away.
Thank you so much, Ntabiseng, and thank you to Saibpp for inviting us, to you, Tolo, to Fundi, and to my fellow speakers. Really happy to be here, and thank you, Molly, for making sure that I found my way here. I want to really contextualize this conversation around the global platform and talk about how this is so relevant to where we are as the world right now on this issue of women's economic empowerment, access to assets. You know, one of the biggest issues that's happening is, as you mentioned just now, Fundi, is that we are 25 years since the Beijing Platform for Action, and that was the blueprint for gender equality at the time. And indeed, we have achieved quite a bit in terms of you know, much fewer discriminatory laws than we had 25 years ago. But what's interesting for those of you in this sector is that one of the biggest areas that we find is still lagging is the issue of property and property rights. But of course, for us, the biggest issue globally is really about access to land. And so this is an area that we've been working here in South Africa, we've been working across the world to make sure that women have access to land so that they can actually secure property and assets that they need to be able to progress in their lives. This is one that across the world, in some countries, women are more than 80% in each country do not have access to land and therefore to property in general. So it is a big area of focus, and in this country we've been working with you. What we find is interesting, and this is one of the things that we've identified as part of the post-Beijing work, 25 years since Beijing, is that the country may have the law to offer women access to property, but the customs and the social norms and practices that happen, which are still discriminatory, you know, in terms of the culture, you know, property is very much a man's world. And because of that, what has tended to happen is a contradiction or a paradox where women have, on the one hand, access to land, but on the other hand don't. And that's one of the big powers of RBG as she passes away and goes on to rest after doing such amazing work across the world, was just being able to enable women to sign for themselves access to property. So in partnership with UN Women, we work with our partners in Habitat and other parts of the UN. This has been a big area of work just to make sure that women have access to property. So South Africa is in a better position from a policy perspective, but from a practice perspective, the majority of South African women in many parts of the country, depending on the province and therefore the sort of customary practice, struggle to actually access property to be able to do what they need to do in terms of access. One of the big areas that we're looking at as UN Women, we have established going forward, what does it look like for us to transform the agenda towards 2030? Because 2030 is the year that we expect to have an expiration date towards gender equality. And to be able to do that, as you look at the different sustainable development goals, what we are recognizing that economic justice is one of the biggest areas that we need to focus our attention. And that we know that if we are to invest in countries specifically on women's economic empowerment and productivity, looking at access to assets, particularly land and property, that we expect that the economies would grow by at least 10%. In Africa, we're estimating $316 billion would be added if all we did was ensure women's equal access to property rights. And so that's a big area of our focus. So we are investing country by country to make sure that women have that access. The current gender disparity is estimated at about $700 billion US dollars. So it's a huge gap. And that plays out obviously in the way in which companies pay women, in the actual opportunities they give. One of the other big areas that we've been working very hard on is focusing on identifying where in the market or where in the economy women can access opportunity. And the one area that we have been working is on looking at this issue of preferential procurement over the last 3 years. And what we have identified there is that for an economy like South Africa that is valued at over 3 trillion, even though obviously we've lost quite a bit of ground in the COVID 6 months, but in actual fact, about a third of that goes towards procurement, both from the private and the public sector, goods and services, some of which, as you know, are embroiled in corruption. But in actual fact, what we know is that if women had their due access, between 30% across Africa is the figure that the AU is pushing on, 40% is what the President of South Africa has announced at least 2 times now. And if women had this full access, we expect to be able to move over 600 billion of South Africa's economy into women's hands. In one of the municipalities that we've been working very closely with, in the Eastern Cape, one of the things that we found is that if you had preferential participation from the policy side, that in actual fact, you could move quite a bit of money into women's hands. And there's at least 1 billion that went into construction and property, women-owned businesses in particular. So, but that's a lot of work that has had to be driven specifically from the government institutions to be able to make a deliberate policy to buy from women. And that's some of the work that we've been doing. I'm sure Judy will talk about it some more. So this for us is a really big area. In terms of women's own access, and finance is another big area that we have found to be quite a big issue, in that women may have access to opportunity, but they're then limited by their access to finance to be able to actually take on this opportunity. So some initial work that we had been doing across Africa, the Graça Machel Trust, who started promoting the work of the New Faces, New Voices, is one piece of work. We've been doing work on innovative financing to start looking at what are the different ways in which countries can start putting money on the table that's easier accessible by women without the usual very stringent measures that assume that you've got decades and decades of collateral that you've had, for generations. And so a lot of that work has been looking at innovative financing, providing banking guarantees. And so we've been working, like in Kenya, we've been very successful in the work that we've done in terms of supporting the banking sector in finding alternative forms of guarantees to be able to ensure that women have access to finance. South Africa has tended to be very, very rigid in its banking regulations, or very structured in its banking regulations, and is therefore not as facilitatory for many women businesses. One of the conversations that we're having now, and this is a new conversation in Africa, and we're just in the early stages of this conversation, is about introducing a gender bond, because a lot of the money conversations that have happened until now have been actually, you know, in the regular sort of finance and banking sector. But now, looking at the debt and capital markets, we are having discussions about what does a gender bond look like, and can we begin to look at the whole world of innovative financing in relation to impact bonds. So this is a conversation that we're having. We're just having meetings today, in fact, and we think that we're going to start looking at new ways to put money in the market for women-owned businesses in particular, to have access to funding. Now, obviously, because property linked to land and real estate is you know, you've got such strong collateral, you would be in pole position to actually access this gender bond. And so these are discussions that we would like to be able to have with you as Saibpp, to see whether or not there isn't an opportunity to really structure something that's specific to Saibpp. It's new work. We have been doing some of this work in Egypt and in Morocco. Kenya is having some initial discussions around this, but it is very, very new, because this whole discussion around impact bonds and how impact bonds work is quite new in our markets. There is a big conversation that is taking place globally that South Africa is participating in, and it's led by the President of South Africa, but it's also led by, you know, there's multiple stakeholders who are party to this, is that there is, and what UN Women has put on the table with this Generation Equality Forum, and we're basically saying, if we're going to move from the 25 years that we've had since Beijing to now move towards this 10 years of super action towards the expiration of gender equality, because otherwise we're about 200 years away from gender equality at the current pace. So for us to move in that direction, we've come up with what we're calling action coalitions. There are 6 action coalitions across the world that are multi-stakeholder, that have women's organizations like you, and associations, that have governments, but also have large business as part of this. And in that conversation, we have created this action coalition on economic justice. And it's looking at what are the areas that we really need to unpack and starting to break the back off, to ensure that women can have access to opportunities, stronger opportunities. One of them is looking at digital IDs. So digital IDs is a major issue. And it's one of the ones that we are looking at, to be able to actually have mass access by women. Another one is looking at this issue of preferential procurement. Another key point is around equal pay of work of equal value. And actually on Friday, we celebrated for the first time International Equal Pay Day, where we have found that in South Africa, we're at about 27% less for women versus that of men. The other big area is that we find that this issue of property, and I don't know about the culture of Saibpp, I don't know about the depth of the culture around the property across the country, but what we know is that if there is a culture of discrimination in general, in terms of how the organization is led, and where women sit, and whether women are formally represented in leadership, in an organization such as yours, that will determine to what extent investments are actually poured down, and women are encouraged to participate. So we do need to understand what the overall culture is in the property industry. We've seen in land, and I raised the issue of social norms and stereotypes, that as much as you have pronouncements of openness to have women participate, the unconscious biases are so entrenched that they are, for us, the greatest and the most, the biggest challenge that we have ahead, to be able to break the back of gender inequality, especially in the economic sector. So as we think about this for Saibpp, we need to look and see what is the representation like at the top. Do we have women leadership across the organization? Do we have women leaders across the property sector? And are they able to influence the direction of investments in general and participation? So these are some of the conversations that we're having at a global level. And these are the conversations that we want to be able to start changing and shifting, and start looking at how do we make sure that we have a full analysis of the property sector, what's its potential, what should be in women's hands, and then break down the actual challenges that we need to overcome to be able to see an equal plate on the table for women, you know, as you launch your Women's Forum today. Do women in Saibpp and your various partners, do you actually have equal access to the opportunities, and what will it take for us to get there? So these are some of the policies that we're pushing. We're working with companies. We have what is called the Women's Empowerment Principles that 70 different South African companies are now signatories of. Some of them are in the property industry, but we have to ask them to put their money where their mouth is. It's not just about having 2 women in position and having a few women and looking at some kind of policy in your organization. It's about looking at your bottom line and making sure that your annual reports are really indicating to us that you're ensuring that 40–50% of who you buy from, who you do business with, who are your real stakeholders in this business are women. And that's what we want to see from you. So I'll stop there and I'll take your questions and just see what else would be useful to add. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was extremely, extremely informative. Now, one of the things that you touched on actually was the fact that, as you mentioned, from a policy perspective, South Africa is in a fantastic position when it comes to positioning women fairly when it comes to access to business. However, this hasn't actually translated to numbers. So, because as a Saibpp Women's Forum, we don't want to just have conversations. We actually want to have actionable steps at the end of each of these forums. We want to know, how can women take action and position themselves in such a way that they can gain access to funding, 1, but 2, how they can actually position themselves well to be able to take advantage of the gender bond when it does eventually come online.
I think that the Women's Forum is probably the most important step that you've taken, because women's collective action is what makes the difference. In 2017, 2018, the UN had a high-level panel on women's economic empowerment. And when I'm done speaking, I'll find the link for you and put it in the chat so people can access that document. And in that document, we looked quite extensively at what does it take to break the back of women's economic empowerment? And so we looked at these issues like preferential procurement, looked at, what is the sort of corporate culture that is driving gender equality, and this issue of making sure that every company has women's empowerment principles and abides by those policies. But at the top of that was the issue of women's collective voice and collectivism, and being able to come together to actually drive for exchange, for whatever it is that you're pushing to change for. It's so clear to us that the issue of financial access, and I've been an entrepreneur in this country, so I do know what the limits are to access where there's, where you have opportunity. One of the things and the studies that we've been doing on this work on preferential procurement and women's economic empowerment, we've got over 5,000 women in our database. We have partnerships with multiple women's business associations and Black Business Council. With Judy, we've been working very closely recently. And what we have identified is that when women business associations start understanding where to find information about opportunities, we are in a much better position. But it actually does call on the companies that are putting the opportunities on the table to make them easily accessible. So we're working from the policy side, from the corporate side, to say, you need to put your opportunities on the table. You need to unbundle those opportunities and make information so easily available that you're putting them in front of the associations. So we want to dare companies to come forward and say, Saibpp Women's Forum for 2021, Here are the opportunities that we're going to be looking for. This is what we're going to be procuring, right? So once that's on the table, then you can then organize yourselves to be able to access the opportunities. In terms of the gender bond, like I said, it's a very early discussion, but it's a discussion that has come because of the frustration that the gaps are so huge in this space of financing of women that we need to find new ways of bringing women and including women, financial inclusion being such a big issue for us. But we have to start looking at how corporate behavior starts shifting in terms of capital markets. And so we need to do some work there, and we will be having some kind of seminar soon on this issue of the gender bond. So we'll involve you in that. So that you have an opportunity to actually be there early days and start talking to us about where the gaps are. Multilateral and development finance institutions have been trying to create different platforms that enable women's finance. But again, we need to align a model. And that's part of what we've been doing at UN Women, is trying to create the kind of models that say what needs to be done by the corporate sector or the public sector, the SOE, to make information easily available around what the opportunities are. And then have women collectively working to prepare themselves for those opportunities. So that's what we've been doing. And we've been doing that with the public sector and lining up opportunities more and more and more, so that we know and we can say to you, we know this is coming up, prepare yourselves. And what does that take? And so we've been doing some incubation kind of support to women businesses so that you actually are ready to take on those opportunities.
That is absolutely phenomenal. Thank you so much for that answer. There are many more questions for you, so please do stay on the line, and I will definitely shoot them to you at the end of our conversation. Thank you very much, Anne. Up next, we have Judy Ngwedi. Now, I'll read Judy's bio for you, and then we'll have Judy then come online and switch on her camera and speak to us about her role at the Black Business Council, as well as her views on our topic at hand. Judy Ngwedi is the Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of Torvest Holdings, and she remains the President of the South African Nuclear New Build Plant Company. Prior to this, she was the Senior Vice President at Areva, which is the global nuclear and renewable energy company. Judy is a highly experienced and top-level executive from a company level, as well as a director in very many companies to date. She has over 25 years experience in these roles, including managing director and senior vice president in roles such as in tourism, in film, in television, in radio, and in the public service broadcasting sector. Judy, it is a pleasure to have you online with us today.
Thank you so much. So firstly, let me start off by leaving you with a thought to which I'll return when I make my formal presentation. But before that, I shall just put my timer on, if you don't mind. So when you hear it, my time is up. The strong Black woman is honored every August in the month in South Africa. She's honored for her valiant fight against injustice, past and present. So here we are today, after the month of August, to unpack equity, access, assets, and either the impact or the lack thereof. So good afternoon, Ntabiseng Makgabo, and thank you for having me. I'm especially excited to be here today with an active member of the BBC, Saibpp. And not only are they very active, it's gone off. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can still hear you. Though we cannot see you, we can definitely hear you.
Well, this is interesting. I think the generator will kick in quite soon. Thank God the Wi-Fi is still working. And you can see my big white glasses. I look like Kermit the Frog, but bear with me. So I'm particularly excited to be here at the launch of the Women's Forum of Saibpp, because Saibpp has been a very active partner in the Black Business Council's Women's Alliance, and I'll return to that in a few seconds. Our host today, Saibpp, may I acknowledge the chairperson, Fundi Mazibuko, the president of Saibpp, Tolo Makawala, and then, of course, the CEO, Vuyiso Muchekwane. And then to my esteemed fellow panelists, whom I'm looking forward to hearing from, Mpumi Mpofu, who is a key partner in the business that I'm involved with as the CEO of the airports company. So I'm so sorry, Ntabi Singh, I am not the CEO of Turbes. I am the COO at Turbes, in case Mpumi makes a very bold announcement to say there's been a leadership change at the Black Business Council, and at Turbes, and Judy is now the CEO. No, I'm the COO. And then, of course, COVID has gotten in the way of us continuing our conversations and us rebuilding our businesses in Mpumi, because you are a vital part in our value chain. So I know that all airports companies are taking tremendous amounts of strain and stress. And of course, so are we, because South Africa's tourism sector relies heavily on an inbound international market, but I'm not here today to talk about tourism. And then, of course, another very special panelist, Molly Gallant. I met Molly for the first time just over a year ago. She was heavily pregnant. I hope you don't mind me sharing that with the audience. And it was the day I hosted.
Sorry, not pregnant. I think I had gained so much weight.
Oh, okay. Now you can kill me for that. It was one of the other ladies who were at Dr. Tandi's lunch. I hosted a lunch for her on the Friday, and on the Saturday, she met with her very untimely death, and Molly will tell us about her role in that particular business. And of course, as Anne has shared with you, she's a partner with us at the Black Business Council in our work with our newly formed Women's Alliance. So as I've mentioned, we have just emerged from a very intense Women's Month. The violence has not stopped, the killings have not stopped. The impact of COVID has hit women the hardest, because since April to June, when the numbers were presented, of the 3 million job losses, 2 million of those job losses were women. And it's no surprise that it was women hardest hit, because in terms of the structure of the South African economy, the jobs that are first shed are the jobs where the majority of women work, women in the services industry, women in the cleaning industry, etc. And this is where women have been hardest hit again. And of course, hunger, which has now become one of our major post-COVID realities. Women are enduring the brunt of hunger because women will have the children eat first before they eat. So women today at this very important launch, it's tough, it's hard, but we must persevere and continue to fight, because this was not going to be an event, our liberation. We have been fighting for this since the dawn of our democracy, and I'll revert to that very shortly. So engagements around Women's Month are often promoted and accompanied by mantras such as Watinta Bafazi, Watinta Mbogoro. You strike a woman, you strike a rock. Geologists and earth scientists define a rock as a composition of minerals that form a solid substance. This is what we made of, fellow sisters. Supplementing the Black woman as a rock metaphor are aphorisms such as Umama Insika Ikaya. A woman is the pillar of the home. And this is another variable that impacts us when it comes to the understanding of gender-based violence, because this saying depicts the weight that is placed on women purely on the basis of their gender. Subsequently, if this home falls apart, then her womanhood is questioned. She would have failed as a woman because another metaphor that we know so often as expressed in South Africa is the fact that a woman is supposed to hold the knife at its sharpest edge. So it is unimaginable how any person would want to hold the sharp edge of a knife willingly or otherwise. And even as we, our sisters, our nieces, our grandmothers, our aunts have tried to hold on to that sharp edge of the knife, they haven't been able to protect themselves. And the perpetrators have been able to pierce their hearts, their minds, their brains, and murder them. So is this not a tool used often, or maybe too often, to keep Black women at the sharp edge of abuse and poverty? This disregard for the Black woman, and I'm talking about the Black woman because we come from the Black Business Council, and even in the documents, both the Beijing, the document that went to Beijing, and in the department's strategic plan, it is the Black woman, the African woman, who is talked about. So this disregard for the Black woman in the context of our democracy dates back to the notion of what Prof. Desiree Lewis calls the two-stage revolution, that prioritize the anti-apartheid struggle above class and gender struggles. In other words, we as Black women and our forebearers, our great-grandmothers and our grandmothers, were told to suspend our struggle against male domination, patriarchal subordination, and overall gender oppression until the end of apartheid. While 26 years after apartheid, the gender struggle remains deferred. And by all accounts and all research and all data, our struggle is still a long way, but there is a silver lining. And this is what brings us together today, because it's women. I'm going to now start sharing my screen because I'll come to the crux of what I wanted to share today. There we go. And this is the work of the Black Business Council. Just bear with me. Almost there, colleagues. I'm going to ask for assistance from, there we go, oh, too big. And of course, like all of us, we always start with a quote from the famous Maya Angelou. And I think what Saibpp is doing today in the launch of the Women's Forum is that the women today standing up for themselves, as Maya Angelou says, each time a woman stands up for herself without knowing it, possibly without claiming it, she stands up for all the women. So Mama Winnie said many, many years ago, and the questions were asked of Anne, how is it that women access these bonds? In 1976, when the students were burning the country, Mama Winnie said very clearly, and it's still appropriate today, if you are to free yourselves, if we are to free ourselves, we must break the chains of oppression ourselves. Only then can we express our dignity, because only when we have liberated ourselves can we cooperate with other groups in our societies. Any acceptance of humiliation, indignity, or insult is an acceptance of our inferiority. And therefore, we need to take what is rightfully ours, because no man, no government is going to give it to us. And we've seen this again and again, so we have to take it. I'm not going to go into the preamble, and talked very eloquently around the Beijing Platform for Action. When I joined the delegation in Beijing 25 years ago, we were led by Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi and Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. Mama Winnie at that time was not part of the delegation. It was part of the struggle within South Africa's politics. But when Mama Winnie arrived at the big hall, the entire hall stood and celebrated her as the leader of South Africa and the leader of Africa. And as they often do, they claimed her as their very own. And what we at the Black Business Council, in terms of our women's agenda, what we're doing as we honor RBG, the famous RBG, one of the giants that have fallen, is that when you fight for things that you care about and things that are important to all of us, but we must do it in a way so that others will lead and join us. The BBC has called for gender responsive policy, gender responsive procurement, and gender budgeting. South Africa led globally in the space of gender budgeting, and a few years into the new democracy, it fell off the table, and we are all the poorer for it. Speaker Baleka said very clearly, if there's one thing she would do, when I asked her in an interview after she retired from Parliament as the Speaker, if there's one thing she would do and she would do differently, was to ensure that every year there was the gender budget. That was one of the biggest mistakes we made as a country. Already Anne and some of our previous speakers like Fundi have talked about access to markets, access to finance, leadership, and what brings us here today is the issue of land and housing. And you, Saibpp, you are the experts at this. So the BBC is very clear in terms of our Women's Alliance. We are to be the voice for a transformed economy that is predominantly led by Black women-owned small, medium, and large-scale and large businesses. But not only as we live in cities and in urban centers, but in our township economies, in the informal sector, and in rural economies. And that is why we hosted Toko Didiza recently. I'm not going to go into the strategy. I will make that available to you because our strategy underpins the purpose statement. We have outlined for ourselves a very key set of indicators, and in our presentation to the President before the 9th of August, we asked for deliberate provisions in procurement. And the President surprised all of us in his commitment by saying that 40% of all procurement will be in the hands of women. I think I have literally 2 minutes left, so I'm going to go through it. So 40% is what we're working towards. And as we rolled out Women's Month, we had some very deliberate engagements with ministers that we felt were critical and key to us moving the dial around the 40% procurement. But we are also looking at the private sector and their procurement practices and how they re-engineer their supply chains chain backwards. So when we hosted our minister, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, she friends, sisters, and colleagues on the call today, she outlined to us very candidly in a fashion that she's known for, her candor, her putting the facts on the table. She said that her department, in terms of their procurement, it's less than 10% on Blacks, not just on Black women. So of course, there is a tremendous opportunity for us to close that gap. We then had the meeting with our Minister for Women, Youth, Persons with Disabilities, around economic justice for women. And as you may notice, we are partnering with UN Women because they have the breadth and the reach and the depth when it comes to data analytics research. And we can then partner with them in terms of the discourse, be it the new conversations we must have and the new financial instruments that should become available for women. This particular webinar that we hosted is of critical importance to Saibpp, and this is around human settlements, water and sanitation. And again, the minister opened the doors to us to say, come and tell me what is not working in terms of the organs of state that she has created or that government has created within her portfolio. So again, we've identified the next steps, and together with you, Saibpp, we will be partnering with Minister Sisulu and her 2 DGs as we carve out opportunities for women in this space. A very powerful webinar was looking at the issue of land and rural development, because food security in terms of the impact of COVID, this has been a sector that has been severely impacted, and moving forward, we need to ensure our own livelihoods and our own sustainability when it comes to food, so that in some of the territories that I work in, Kenya, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Uganda, we have our workers are on leave, but they've gone back to their rural small holdings, and hunger is not the issue in those countries as it is an issue in our country. Our final webinar was held with Minister Patricia de Lille, and the jury's out, and you need to decide how you feel about this ministry. But she went in there guns blazing to try and rearrange the current beneficiaries of incredible budgets in her department. Because if you may not know, that there are in the main 4 companies that handle the asset portfolio, 4 companies unchanged since the year. Since our democracy, and that is where we're at. So in a nutshell, we have said that how we're going to shift the needle for women in this space, it is to ensure that the procurement practices change. And I think my time is up, but I'm going to end with, I know your president talked about Ruth Ginsburg. I've always been a great admirer of her. And of course, we're seeing some, the reforms that have taken place in our own country around title deed, ownership of land, etc. And so when we talk about 40%, and many of my male friends and colleagues are saying they're feeling marginalized, well, you know, tough titties to them. Because when they were all men, and they sat around tables making decisions as all men, as Justice Ginsburg said, when someone asked her, when I'm asked, will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? And when she said she would be happy if there were nine women, and that people are shocked. And she said, but there's always been 9 men and nobody ever raised the question. So when we ask for 40%, why are we being questioned? And if we ask for 50%, why are we being questioned? And if we ask for 100%, so then be it that way, because for centuries, men have guarded jealously their power and their patriarchy and their privilege. And I only have boy children for the record, so I'm not anti-male. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judy. That was so informative. And I actually have a very good question for you. Seeing as you've spoken quite a bit about this 40% procurement share, what active steps can we as women, practical active steps, can we take in order to be able to participate in this procurement practice? So, you know, it's all good and well for the policy to be available, but how do you position yourself as a female entrepreneur to be able to be in the position to be a part of the 40%?
Well, I think there are 2 ways in which you deal with it. You know, if the enabling environment is if the enabling environment is engendered, like we have the 40%, then we can hold our governments and our departments accountable. But what we've said to these ministers, and for us, there's one other ministry that we have to engage with, and that is DTI, that we are going to hold you accountable and we want consequences. And we've always said at the BBC that we are going to be aggressively diplomatic and we are going to stand in their way and we're going to get in their way and we will not get out of the way. So number 1 is we are engaging with the UN as our partner to begin to mine the data and to establish the benchmarks, because without data, you cannot go anywhere. So that's the one respect, is the system shift and the macro environmental shift. And we as an organization, the Black Business Council, we can push for that. And then we push for that in support of women who then come and they share their stories. So when there is sexual harassment and forms of extreme pressure in order to do the request for sexual favors in exchange for contracts, we can go to government and say, we want these particular perpetrators dealt with. And we have another expression where we say, we now want to see you in orange overalls. Orange is not the new black. Orange means you go to jail. Then we have also called for, in a program that we've developed and designed with some of the leading women in the sector, around women-only panels. And the women-only panels will create ring fencing around clusters in terms of procurement, commodities, clusters, whether it's in the oil and gas, whether it's in innovative building materials. And those women panels only, so 2 of the ministers, we've already in our second engagement with them to begin to set up these women-owned panels so that we have dealt with the legislation around designated groups and set-asides. It is legally possible, and we want a window for female-only procurement, 2 months of only female procurement, and then procurement from these panels. So we have to continue the fight. And every time a woman is rejected on the basis of price or whatever it is, we will play the advocacy role. And now we have another forum, a women's forum within Saibpp, that can join us at the hip or become part of the rib cavities. And we are going to have to fight for it, because they're not going to give it to us without a fight.
Thank you so much. That was very well answered, and I absolutely agree with you. Please do stay on the line. There are a few more questions that I do have for you from members of the floor. However, I do need to speak to our next speaker. So thank you very, very much, Judy. Up next, we have the CEO of the Airports Company of South Africa, Ms. Mpumi Mpofu. Mpumi Mpofu was named the new executive chair of the Airports Company of South Africa. She was previously the Director General in the Department of Planning, Monitoring, and Evaluation in the Presidency. Ms. Mpofu has extensive experience spanning over 25 years in the fields of transport, infrastructure, development, local and government, as well as town and regional planning. Ms. Mpumi has been in the following projects: the Gautrain, the Rea Vaya, the airport's development across the country, as well as preparations for the 2010 World Cup. She is a qualified urban and regional planner by profession. Ms. Mpumi, are you available? Are you ready for us? Kindly switch on your microphone so that we can hear you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Tabiseng, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to come and address yourselves on this very important occasion of launching a forum at Saibpp. I represent women in the built environment in many facets, and I'd like to engage with our audience today just to really share what experience the Airports Company South Africa has with specifically the developments in that particular space. Can I just check that the screen is sharing with the presentation?
Yes, your screen is sharing.
Is the screen with the presentation?
Yes,
yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. So, no, thank you very much for this. What I'd like to share with you is the basic road that AXA has traveled in empowering women over the last 10 or more years, and really actively supporting its Black Economic Empowerment Program, which has been extremely successful. Initially, I'll cover the areas that share with you the Built Environment Program of AXA, Airports Company South Africa. We deal specifically with airports planning, and in that we cover disciplines of urban planning, quantity surveying, civil engineering, business and commerce. Importantly also, we have portfolio and project management, which basically would cover the disciplines of architecture, civil engineering, mechanical engineering, quantity surveying and land surveying. A very extensive program in engineering in relation to aviation development, including mechanical, civil engineering, and electrical engineering. And then, of course, since 2006, we've been extensively redeveloping and expanding our airport infrastructure, which has made us quite a big player in the property management and development space, where we have disciplines covering business commerce, property evaluators, property developers, 1%, but in a sense, we're making significant progress. 27.3 could be better, and every year we continue to employ, we would ensure that we do so and promote women, and particularly Black women. In the middle management, 37.5%, and then junior management is much bigger representation at 41.2%. One of the very important interventions for us is to attract and build critical and scarce skills, and targeting particularly Black women in these professional areas. So we've developed a number of programs to promote and nurture women in AXA and to attract young new talent. We see quite an exciting emergence of young Black professionals coming through in these environments, but we have several programs that include our International Council, Airports Council International offers several leadership development programs that we access, employee bursaries, training and development, and leadership coaching, but also we offer aviation and access awareness and learnerships, internships, and apprenticeships throughout our organization. To support Black business-owned, Black women-owned businesses, we've also adopted the Construction Industry Development Board contract participation goal, which also includes Black women-owned businesses. And basically, we pre-qualify broad-based Black economic empowerment level 2 suppliers who subcontract 15 to 30% of Black women, youth, and people with disabilities. Importantly as well, our current targets on construction programs include CIDB, National Contractor Development Program, Enterprise Development, the 30% Black-owned, and the localization, 70% local enterprises at 5%, and local labor at 3%, training 0.25 to 0.5% of the contract value. Now, vendor analysis, we've analyzed what has happened at AXA over the last 10 years. In the first 5, 106.4 million, which was at 5%, but that has grown considerably in the next period of 2006 to 2020 to 359 million. Importantly, in these particular areas, we can break down the spends in these particular periods. We've seen our areas, our technical area, our technical services area, taking 36% and 6 million to Black-owned vendors, and our infrastructure and asset management component, 55%, which is 15 million. A total spend of 48% to Black-owned, Black women-owned vendors. But I'd also like to share at this point some of our flagship projects, which would have participation of Black women, and these include some very exciting projects which have escaped the decimating effects of COVID. And I'm sure, as was indicated earlier, you are all aware that Airports Company South Africa has suffered significant losses as a result of the lockdown and the travel restrictions. And basically, we have to rethink our entire capital program. The programs that I will highlight here have survived, either principally because they were already under implementation or because of their critical nature to continue to support our business. First is the OR Tambo Western Precinct development, which basically is 180 square meters of mixed commercial use. I'm sure a lot of you, as driving to the airport, have seen a big construction program at the entrance of OR Tambo. That is 50% contracted to women-owned business through Harry Prop, and a joint venture between Harry Prop, which owns 50%, and MMAs, 25%, and Taba, 25%. The other important project is the taxiways rehabilitation, where we've contracted 100% to Black women-owned businesses. And in this particular instance, Realitamisa Trading and Projects is basically helping us to deliver the taxiway rehabilitation. Importantly as well, our Delta Aprons project, where 15% is contracted to Black women-owned businesses. And in King Shaka International Airport, we have the Bravo Taxiway and Apron development, and in there the construction, which is the main contractor, Downtouch Investment, is 51.67% Black-owned. In King Shaka again, the landside precinct plan, where we've basically are developing a world-class gateway into KZN. Importantly, we have a subcontracted town planning initiative, which is 75% white women-owned, and Masindela Properties, which is 50% Black women-owned. And the town planning is a lead on the project, which is a woman. 35% of the contract value have also been subcontracted to Black women-owned businesses in total in that project. Overall, traditionally, we focus our efforts on what we call the Golden Triangle, which is our OR Tambo, King Shaka International Airport, and Cape Town International Airport. But in our rest, the balance of the network of our airports continue to pursue programs that promote women, provide opportunities, particularly in the smaller cities and towns, in Brandfisher, in Bloemfontein, in George, Kimberley, and Uppington. In those particular areas, we have subcontracting arrangements that include Malani Padeachi and Associates, which is 100% Black owned. And I must indicate we're all very happy about the new joint arrangement between them and another very strong Black women-owned company in South Africa. 12.1% of the contract value subcontracted to Black-owned women businesses. We've looked through the environment and assessed really what are the barriers to entry. And we find, and we did a study in 2018 which identified very significant constraints: tender complexity, liquidity, market success in the tenders, and that basically also includes emerging Black businesses impaired due to economic scale and the result of limited volume of work. Long-term relationship with tenants is another barrier to entry, and banking charters which favor Black participation, which sometimes we commend, but in essence, the risk management practices favor large businesses. Our approach then is to develop significant mitigation measures, including pre-qualification criteria, evaluation criteria that is objective and reasonable, and basically shifting some of the elements. One of the important issues is around how normally they rate experience of companies. Now, in a post-democracy South Africa, simply what you can conclude is the majority of Black-owned companies cannot claim to have more than 25 years experience, because that's since the advent of democracy. So by definition, we encourage experience that looks at the resource level rather than the company level. And invariably, as Black people in most instances, and particularly Black women, we have extensive experience. But because the criteria is set at the company level, which very often we have only established in 5 years or less, our own experience is not valued nor counted for in these particular circumstances. So it just needs creativity for us to look at how we value and acknowledge experience of individual members of companies rather than the companies themselves only. Importantly as well, the non-critical resources should be qualified as tender conditions rather than evaluation criteria. But importantly, we also accept all CIDB permitted guarantees. We also have established a panel of property developers, which is aimed at achieving our transformation targets. Very important for this particular forum, and congratulations for its establishment to Saibpp. What's very important for all of us is to use this particular platform to advance gender equality. And if we focus specifically in the built environment, we would need to be able to define the specific role and space that we would play in doing so. So let's start at the top. What is really the South African problem? In my previous job, I was responsible for indicators of the economy and indicators of country performance. One of the important issues we start looking at is the Gini coefficient, which is currently between 0.66 and 0.68. And the problem with the Gini coefficient, when you analyze it quite importantly, is that there are various major contributors to that overall South African country inequality. Importantly, the contributors to the Gini coefficient are income inequality, asset inequality, racial inequality, and gender inequality. So a very important element and a contributory factor is for us, particularly your forum, to promote and close the gender pay gap. And this actually would include targeting corporates, companies, making this as an important part of criteria in areas of awarding tenders and others to see whether companies comply with gender pay gap. This is a matter that is totally unacceptable, that we still have in corporate South Africa and in employment across the board, a woman getting paid less for doing the equal amount of work as a man. That contribution towards closing the gender inequality gap, we are assured in our analysis, would contribute significantly towards shifting our Gini coefficient. I understand also that government has taken an initiative to eliminate this gender pay gap through legislation, and what a forum like yourselves can do is actively promote, monitor, call out companies that are still exercising gender pay gaps, because importantly, the contribution towards inequality elimination will come primarily through this gender pay gap being made illegal. The second area, Judy Nokwedi refers to some work that was done previously. I'm happy to indicate that government in last year developed the gender planning, budgeting, monitoring, and evaluation framework. Now, what is important about that and its adoption is that across the public sector, and which should be actually introduced in the private sector, would be a mechanism that allows for the monitoring of compliance of companies, institutions, and ensure that gender planning is done, that budgeting accordingly to implement gender-based programs, assessing issues such as job creation between men and women. Monitoring and evaluation will be a critical element to see the performance of companies against the standards that are set in that gender planning, budgeting, and monitoring and evaluation framework. Also to promote employment and business opportunities for women in the built environment, promoting girl-child career guidance in the built environment. Importantly, we very often focus on those of us who are of adult age and hope that the picture will change. History has taught us that in order to promote and increase the pipeline of women in built environment, it will be quite important to start right at the bottom in high schools and promote built environment careers in career guidance areas in high schools, in universities, so that the uptake of professionals in the universities increases, so that we see more young women get into these professions, but also to promote scholarships, learnerships, and other support programs. I think all of these efforts and your particular activities as a forum to break the triple yoke of gender, racial, and class oppression that is faced by women will go a long way of turning the picture around. The professions are responsible in their own right for monitoring their sectors, but a forum of such a nature would actually do a lot of benefit for all of us if we're all to be held accountable. There are very important issues that actually need us linking all our activities so that we can promote women in the built environment. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Bumi. That was so informative. And really, the insights that you have shared around the work that you are doing with the organization are truly inspiring. Thank you very much for that. Now, I do have a question for you. And because you've spoken so well about kind of all of the procurement initiatives that you have in place, what I would like to know is, how can a forum such as this one play a meaningful role in moving the needle when it comes to females participating in procurement practices in other spaces? Because obviously now you have shown us that you have quite a bit of experience in your company when it comes to driving procurement policies and practices.
Thank you very much, Ntabi. One of the important elements around promoting women in public procurement is really about joining the dots. very often in our country, we have extensive opportunities that are made available, but very often people don't know about them. The missing middle seems to be a mechanism that facilitates, that shares information, that drives advocacy programs, that ensures that women know where the opportunities are to be found. Importantly, in the procurement space, I think we all need to be held accountable for what it is that we do. We all need to be encouraged to even compete amongst each other so that we continue to aim very high to promote women in the procurement, public procurement space. So there would be very interesting things that a forum like this can develop to issue awards for companies that exceed targets, to promote and provide opportunities for those that successfully pursue the promotion of women, but also to just be a vigilant eye on those that are non-compliant, and importantly, assist in the monitoring of performance towards the achievement of that goal, of those goals. What also is important is an advocacy role for a forum of this nature. Advocacy on behalf of women, supporting women, joining the dots. We have an extremely complex economy, complex environment, complex built environment, and very often people operate in the space that they understand. And yet the enablement framework lies in understanding what other organizations outside of your own company can do to assist you, to support you, to provide you with finance, to provide you with expertise, to provide you with training opportunities. So active campaigning, targeting very clear opportunities that emerge is a very important role, I think, for the forum. Let me give you an example. In the public sector, the president last year started announcing a 100 billion infrastructure fund. Now, importantly in that has grown to a 700 billion project pipeline. And as they roll out these very exciting programs, where are women? Where are targets? Where are the programs that would show what would be the benefit to women of a 700 billion infrastructure pipeline of projects? So there's very good work that can be done both in the public and private sector to target these initiatives. There was an investment summit that identified extensive amount of investment to be made. This forum can play a watchdog role and make sure every time big announcements are made, we follow through with encouraging targets to be set and achieved by those sectors, and ensure that they actually can, in the period 25 years after our liberation, very important is to set a new tone for holding all sectors accountable. But also I think there would be just public education programs, webinars like this one, and we're very happy that all of us can now access meetings and webinars and information sessions. One of the important areas where people do not know how to go about is access to funds. I'm happy Anne Githuku indicated the bonds that would become available. But again, our unique South African problem is we are very good at establishing programs like that, but the mechanisms to ensure that they filter down to rural women, to women in every townships, to everybody who would then know how to access those opportunities is still something we are found wanting. So I would think a very important role for the forum is to help us navigate, help all women entrepreneurs navigate a very complex, initially built environment, infrastructure environment, but also generally navigate the very complex parts of our economy and those parts that are facilitative, such as funding mechanisms, in order for them to realize all the opportunities. Thanks.
Thank you so very much. That was so very well answered. And it actually made a whole lot of sense and gave us practical steps as a forum on how it is that we can start participating. Thank you very much, Ms. Pofu.
Thank you.
Our final speaker of today is Molly Gallant. Now, Molly has 27 years of experience in the property industry. She graduated with a BCom degree in economics and initially aspired to be a stockbroker, but accidentally ended up in the property industry. She is the co-owner and CEO, as well as managing director of Ryden International Property Consultants, a property and facilities management company. She's the co-owner and director of Zabasi Properties, a rural shopping center development company. She's co-owner and director of J&R Housing, a residential and student accommodation development company. She's a shareholder and director of RMS, which is the remote metering solutions company. She is also a Lifetime Achievement Award recipient and co-founder of Saibpp, ex-board member of the Property Sector Charter Council, and ex-board member of TFMC, now known as Bidvest FM. Molly, it is truly, or Sis Molly, it is truly an honor to have you with us today, and I really look forward to having you share your experiences in this industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nthabi, and good evening. It's almost evening now, or afternoon, let me say, to all. Yeah, I was just chuckling about what Judy had said, and I'm sure Judy not taking a wipe at you. You know, I got some SMSs here wondering, Molly, when were you pregnant? So I pardon you, my friend, because Judy was just confusing me with Letty from Motewo Group. So yeah, basically I was asked to give a background of challenges that I had faced as I navigated through this industry. Challenges faced by Black companies, and also talk about opportunities. So I will just give you a snippet of my 28 years journey, which has been long, hard, and involved a lot of sweat and perseverance to get to where I am today. But it was all worth it, all in all, you know, because it has really built my resilience, hard skin to weather all storms, and the strength to be, you know, to get to where I am right now. And through all of that, I mean, things are just getting there. It's now smooth sailing. So I believe that my being in this industry was not a coincidence. Growing up, you know, I used to go through the Saturday Star home section and just marvel at the properties that were advertised there. And I would tell myself that one day I will live in one of those properties. But little did I know that I will end up in the industry. So after graduating, I joined Wendy Mechanic, wrote my board exam, and became an estate agent at that time. I worked for Wendy Mechanic for 1.5 years. And at the time, I was just headhunted to join Ryden, which is basically an international, a Scottish company that was looking for Black practitioners in 1996 when they entered the country, you know, after we had the new government in power. So I joined them as a director and shareholder, together with my business partner, Jacob Molefe. We did a management buyout in 2000 when Ryden UK basically got frustrated with the inability to penetrate this closed cabal-like dominated market, which was basically quite hostile to international players. Ryden at the time focused on property management, property broking, and facilities management. So we had only one sizable portfolio at the time, a contract that we had with Old Mutual Properties. We did well, you know, in regards to performance of that portfolio. And during those days, it was quite a challenge to operate in this market as a 100% Black-owned company in this hostile environment. So unfortunately for us, as soon as we did the buyout, There were management changes at Old Mutual. We were assigned a new portfolio manager who from the get-go just didn't like us. Fact that we are managing a well-performing portfolio. And at the time as well, our contract had come to an end and it was due for renewal. So instead of renewing and giving us a 3-year contract like she did for other property management companies where she were predominantly white, she put us on a month-to-month contract. We tried to mend the relationship. We used to drive down to fly down to Cape Town to meet their HOD Ian Watt, who was instrumental in awarding us the first contract that we had, you know, in a bid to solicit his support, as we knew that he knew how good we were at our job. Unfortunately, he turned a blind eye to the going-ons, and before we knew it, the carpet was pulled right under our feet. So we had no option but to retrain staff, most of which were Black, and just pay them off. We then had to start from scratch, look for work everywhere we could, and wherever we went, we were just reminded and asked about this contract that we had lost. And no amount of explaining why made a difference. So, you know, we were basically battling to find any new contract. But with a stroke of luck, we won a contract to manage the government-owned Kopanong precinct buildings in around 2003 or 4. And thanks to Saibpp Matlala, our past, he was a Saibpp past president and co-founder, who had no doubt that we could deliver, and motivated for our appointment as he was a consultant running the bid process for the government, the Gauteng Department of Public Works. We managed the portfolio for about 4 years, and as you know, with government, everything has to go out on tender. Unfortunately, at that time, corruption was starting to rear its head, and we lost out. And I wouldn't go into the complexities of that, of how corruption basically led to us losing that portfolio. Again, we had to retrain staff, and then we decided to change strategy and just diversify. We decided to get into the property ownership market when that was a time when government took a decision to empower Black companies by signing long-term leases. A model that was crafted by Saibpp, in which I actively got involved and participated. A model that was approved by the late Minister Stella Sgau. But that was not to be, you know, as you know, our attempts to acquire long leases and to own buildings was blocked by new players. The whole thing was bulldozed by those with political connections. You know, it was during those periods where one could basically submit an unsolicited bid for the signing of a long-term lease with National Public Works. You know, at some point, I remember I managed to secure 3 letters of intent from 3 government departments, had an option to buy 3 properties from a particular landlord, submitted my proposal, was given a runaround by the National Public Works officials. The landlord, who clearly was not on the market at the time, started getting calls from everybody, you know, who were obviously given a heads up by the Public Works officials about these opportunities that I had presented. When he refused their advances, the department turned me down and just didn't approve my proposals. And to my surprise, you know, a month later, I heard that those 3 departments were signed up with, you know, 2 of, you know, Black property funds that we all know of. And that was quite a sad story. You know, we were so shattered and so much that we decided, okay, let's now, you know, divert our attention to somewhere else. So we started looking for land in rural areas. So to date, we have acquired about 4 sites through the Department of Rural Development to develop about 10,000 square meters shopping centers on each site. You know, these sites are in Limpopo, the Northwest, and one in the Free State. You know, and then in 2011, Mayor Masondo awarded us some buildings in the Hillbrow area, where we redeveloped about 300 social units, social housing units. We then, in 2018, acquired and rezoned a property where we now are going to build 100 units of student accommodation. We'll probably break ground in January 2021. And then recently in 2019, we were awarded 5 sites to develop about 1,002 affordable residential units in the inner city. The awards were by Herman Mashaba through JPC. So, you know, the reason we decided to get into property development and ownership, you know, was that we had one thing in mind: to develop, own, and manage our own portfolio, where we would then have a control for over facilities management, where, you know, as owners, obviously we can't be fired, or a contract can't be cancelled, you know, and where we don't have to tender for anything. So, you know, I just felt that I need to tell my story, just to highlight the complexities, to highlight that in order to survive in this industry, you have to basically develop a thick skin and have resilience, because it's a tough industry. You know, think out of the box, diversify, navigate around the roadblocks that you come across, and just find your own niche. So I'm now going to just touch base on the challenges that are faced by Black property practitioners in all areas of the property sector. This industry is basically made up of property management, facilities management, property leasing, property ownership, and property development. So these are areas that I have navigated through. So I will first start with facilities management. You know, within facilities management, there are basically 2 kinds of FM models. The one is the old model, where a company like mine or Saibpp manages the budget of the maintenance of buildings, where we would basically outsource, then manage contractors who provide facilities management, soft and hard services like cleaning, electrical, lift maintenance, garden services, hygiene, plumbing maintenance, etc. The second model is the total facilities model that is used by Bidvest. They also still manage the budget, but then with them it's different in that they outsource the services that I've mentioned to companies that Bidvest owns. So the problem today is that the whole sector, including public sector, are now adopting this total facilities management model. And it's basically unfortunate, because most FM companies, in particular Black companies, are not in that space. We do not have Black companies that operate like Bidvest. We don't have the muscle as Black companies to acquire those services related companies that operate in the space. So when, for instance, when Saibpp got to know that National Public Works was going to go out on tender for proposal calls for total facilities management, we as Saibpp held several meetings with the HODs of the FM division within Public Works, try and convince them to opt for the old model. But unfortunately, our pleas fell on deaf ears, and they went ahead last year and issued the tender for total facilities management. One of the most stringent and prohibiting requirements were that companies that should tender have to have a proven record of having worked on projects with a contract value of about 70 million per annum. Now you tell me which company has that. This was a clear attempt to basically exclude black companies. Not even Motseng, that you know, was considered or made it to the second round. So for us as Ryden, then, you know, when we realized these prohibiting factors, we decided to approach BROL, and then we formed a consortium. So our consortium comprises of BROL, BBC BE, and so with that, we basically won 2 big contracts. You know, and in doing so, we basically submitted a very compelling argument in our proposal for public works to consider us using the old FM model. So through this, BBC BE companies will be subcontracted for most of the work, which is quite good. Yeah, so, you know, it's this whole, you know, stringent and prohibitive tenders that are taken out, you know, present quite a sad reality for Black companies in this country. I mean, until when are we to continue being subjected to partnering with white companies? So as Saibpp Women Forum, I think we should make a proposal to government for the development of a similar model as the CIDB grading system for FM in particular. You know, a major problem in total facilities management approach is that if not challenged, and if we do not get a way around it, it is likely to lead to a dearth of Black companies. Within the FM value chain, as I've mentioned, work gets subcontracted to engineers, civil, you know, engineers such as, you know, civil, structural, electrical, etc., to plumbers, building maintenance companies, cleaning services, garden, health and safety, fire safety, lift maintenance, hygiene, etc., quantity surveying, and so forth. So, you know, just to give you an idea, as a way of probably, yeah, let me say an example. Take a company like BROL, which basically has probably over 3,000 buildings throughout the country under their management. Through the old model of facilities management, they have the ability to outsource to, say, 20 or more different cleaning services companies, for instance, say in Gauteng, Cape Town, KZN, or wherever, you know, where their properties are located. This presents an opportunity for BROL to empower several companies. But then if you take the Bidvest with its total facilities model, only one Bidvest-owned cleaning company gets to do all the 3,000 properties throughout the country. You know, and also Bidvest is not likely to fire that company if it doesn't perform, because it will affect its the bottom line of Bidvest Group. This is also, you know, there actually, you know, we are faced with an issue of conflict, because you can't be a referee and a player at the same time. So as Saibpp Women Forum, I think we need to just continue challenging the adoption of the total facilities management model. The second challenge in the industry is property ownership. Government's initiative to bring Black or to empower Black companies have, you know, in the years been scampered by corruption and inappropriate behavior by some of the Black funds that were given the opportunity to own those government tenanted buildings. Public Works, as a result, has put a moratorium on the signing of these leases. And in the process, Public Works is busy trying to stamp out corrupt activities, and is also dealing with renegotiating, you know, those exorbitant rental rates that were charged by some of the Black funds in the main. So to an extent that at some point, Public Works was even considering doing away with leasing properties from external parties and start utilizing their own buildings. I'm not so sure how far they are with that, but it will be sad if they go that route, because then it will continue to keep aspirant women-owned and aspirant Black-owned companies from getting into the sector. And another area also within the property acquisition space is that the private sector, and may I add some parastatals, PIC included, chose not to conclude deals with Black property companies, you know, and instead chose to conclude those deals with non-property individuals who have political influence. So, and for years, Saibpp has, and some of the Saibpp members have been approaching PIC for the acquisition of the stake in Moana, in Pareto. We approached Transnet Pension Fund for its properties, Dinell properties, and you know, only non-property individuals, property individuals with political connections were, you know, managed to acquire these portfolios. So getting into the third area, I'll talk about property development. Currently, there's a PPP tender that is out for the Gauteng Kopanong government precinct with a 20-year concession, which is, you know, basically in its way, in that form, a kind of form of ownership, as it means whoever gets to win that contract or that tender gets to build, own, and operate those properties during the concession period. We also have the inner city redevelopment opportunities that were issued and awarded by JPC. We have others that were issued by PRASA and the Gauteng Department of Infrastructure, previously known as Gauteng Department of Public Works. We also have the redevelopment of properties issued by the city of Tshwane. And now recently we do have opportunities that have been issued by AXA, as Mpumi has mentioned. And the problem in all this is that you know, most of them have some prohibitive elements that still prevent Black companies from participating. The Kopanong precinct, obviously, as you know, it's clearly geared towards large companies. So with regards to the inner city, PRASA, you know, Gauteng DID tenders, although they are geared towards Black companies in a way, the way in which these tenders are structured, they're still basically a little bit prohibitive. And also what happened during those periods is that many aspirant developers were not equipped enough or did not have the know-how as to how to structure themselves to take advantage of these opportunities. So again, as Saibpp and Saibpp Women Forum, we should look at ways of having workshops to educate and prepare our members in this regard. The fourth area is funding, which is still an issue. I mean, we've got the NEF, we've got IDC, who still don't provide funding for all forms of property projects. The PIC is also very selective on what they will finance. There is the NHFC, GPF, SHRA, and so forth, who basically focus on the funding of social housing and affordable housing. But even so, it is still quite a challenge to ultimately get funding there. Conventional banks are also there to provide funding, but the stumbling block there is that they require a huge percentage of equity. For instance, it will be 70% debt funding, and then you still required to come up with 30% equity. So Black people don't usually have that. So we need to find ways to basically come up with some ideas as to how this can be circumvented. And I'm just glad that Anne has mentioned the government bond. So I'm hoping that we can sit with Anne and her team to craft something in that regard. So as Saibpp Women Forum, I think we need to hold workshops with all stakeholders in the funding space to highlight basically our issues. Saibpp has done that, you know, in the past. And, you know, as women now, we need to still keep pushing for that, for finding a solution in that regard. In closing, clearly, you know, I would say political favoritism, corruption, and lack of support for Black business, you know, if it doesn't come to an end, basically we won't win. And in spite of all this, I must say it's all not doom and gloom. Opportunities worth billions of rands are still out there, some of which Bumi has highlighted. And some are still to come. I mean, in the FM space, Public Works National and all the provincial public works departments around the country, and some of them parastatals and municipalities and the private sector included, are still going to go out on tenders for all of that. On property ownership as well, you know, there will still be opportunities when Public Works starts relaxing the moratorium. There will be a further release, you know, that are to come for properties to be disposed by the PIC, for instance, the city of Joburg, the city of Tshwane, eThekwini municipality, and other major municipalities, PRASA and the government DID included. So as women, we need to come up with a strategy. You know, in the FN space, for instance, what we need to do, we should start looking amongst ourselves, merge our companies to start creating new bid vests of the future. We need to start crafting models that are designed to boost our capacity. In the property development space and property ownership space, we need to stop working in silos. You know, we need to come together. You know, some of our companies are making profits. You know, why don't we take our joint profits, put them into one pot, and start building an equity pot that we could use for this development? I mean, some doctor friends of mine are doing that, and their portfolio is now around 100 million combined. And now they are ready to take on mega development projects that are coming up. And we will be meeting with them at tendering meetings and competing with them. You know, so as women, we need to stick together, collaborate, support each other, know who is doing what, and do it. You know, so I'm just hoping that Saibpp Women Forum will drive this new wave of transformation that will include the empowerment of women within the value chain. So yes, I think that's about it from me. I mean, Anne has emphasized the issue of women collectivism. So I think, yeah, let's just do it. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Smoli. You have truly inspired us with your story on how you started, as well as how you've continued to persevere despite all of the challenges. And I think your note, your key address about women really sticking together is going to be key when it comes to us really moving forward. So thank you very much for that.
Yep.
Ladies, would you kindly all please switch on your cameras as I do our vote of thanks. Initially, I had hoped to be able to answer all of the questions live that have been presented to us. However, all of the questions have been collected and they will be therefore answered on an afterwards basis, and the answers will be sent to everybody via email. I just want to introduce everyone to our CEO, the CEO of the South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners, as she closes for us on this momentous occasion.
Hi, Ntabi.
Hi.
And thank you to everyone who has attended this session. It's been so encouraging to watch the attendance. Oh, sorry, I'm watching this on multiple devices. Let me just switch it off this side. Okay. It's been so encouraging to see that actually the numbers in terms of all the participants that have been logged on to this session have remained on the session throughout the duration of the call. Of the event, and that's really a testament to the quality of the speakers and the quality of the inputs that every single speaker brought to the table today. You know, it's an online event, people have stuff to do, people are multitasking, but you know, the mere fact that people have elected to stay on this call for the duration of the event is just a testament to the depth and the substance of the quality of the conversation that has been had today. So with that said, we have run over a bit, but I think it was well worth it, every single second. I'd like to thank every single one of our speakers. Wow. I mean, Sis Molly, thank you. Powerful, powerful ending, and just such a wonderful way to wrap up. The speaker today. Sis Judy, we know you. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. No, sis, I was just saying, Sis Judy, we know you, you are family, we know you from the BBC, we work very closely together, and certainly Saibpp is a long-standing, in fact, founding member of the Black Business Council, and we continue to work together, and we look forward to working together even in the advancement of the women agenda. Sis Mpumi, thank you very much for availing yourself. AXA as well, not just, I mean, yourself as a professional, your insights were so real. And I think everybody can really get a sense that you not only understand the issues from a side of, you know, being at AXA, but as certainly you understand the depth and the intricacy of the issues that are faced by practitioners in the built environment. And we thank you for your honest contributions. And of course, AXA has always been a long-standing friend of Saibpp. You know, we've always collaborated on various initiatives, and I think that relationship certainly after today is strengthened. And thank you, Anne Githuku. I learned today that it's pronounced Githuku Shongwe. Thank you, also, Anne. We really appreciate your inputs. It's absolutely such an honor to have you here today on behalf of UN Women. And again, such a powerful advocate for women. I've watched you speak in many different platforms on many different fora, and your passion and your commitment to this cause is just unmatched, and it's so consistent every single time. And of course, to our chairperson, firstly to our president. What many of you do not know is there were in fact quite a lot of gentlemen in the audience today, and I was quite encouraged to see that we are not just talking amongst ourselves. There are certainly a lot of men who are allies, who are with us on this journey, and who are supporting the journey that we're on. So, and of course, our president being one of them, and being very much a staunch advocate for women. I know I've spent many hours with him discussing these topics. And in fact, he was, the establishment of this Women's Forum was partly his brainchild. So we really thank you as well for supporting us on this journey. And to our gorgeous chairperson. I mean, it doesn't actually get better than that in the chairperson sweepstakes. So thank you, Fundi, for your commitment to seeing this through, to making it happen. Today is indeed a historic, momentous occasion. It is a legacy that we will leave behind, not just for the organization, but for the industry as a whole. And I've just been watching the comments as well. I think every single person who has been on this call has found value in what we have discussed today. And I just want to leave off by saying, you know, we really, as women, I think we all can relate to the fact that women don't talk, we do. We are the doers of society. We build and we craft every aspect of our society. We are the backbone of this economy. We are the workforce in many organizations. And similarly, in this forum, we are not here just to talk, we are here to do. And I appreciate that every single speaker today has given us an action list, a to-do list. And so we are certainly going to go back to the drawing board as the Women's Forum. We're going to put together a program of action, which of course will be shared with everyone in the weeks to come. And you know, it's important to note that the Women's Forum is not the 4 or 5 EXCO members that form part of the committee. It is all of us. The message that came through today, Anne spoke about it, Molly spoke about it, it's the question of collectivism. We are stronger together. And the more we pool our resources, pool our efforts, our skills, our abilities, the quicker, faster we can go and the more effective we can be at achieving our objectives. And I think that's such a powerful message for all of us. Every single person who is here today, we need you. Raise your hand, tell us where you want to play a role, how you can participate, what you want to do, and every single hand counts because it gets us there faster. Once again, thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. It's such an honor. to be part of this event. And thank you, Ntabi Singh, for being such a gracious and fabulous host. You can see we are grooming all the young leaders. We are grooming our young force of future Saibpp leaders. And Ntabi, you really make us look so good. And your lipstick is amazing. We love it. We need to know what shade that is. So thank you so much for your contribution today. You've been incredible. And with that said, I think, yeah, that is us.
Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. And I do hope that everybody has a lovely evening going forward. We look forward to continuing the conversation. Good night.
Thank you.